Night had fallen upon the city, draping it in a thick cloak of darkness. Street lamps flickered, casting an eerie orange glow that did little to penetrate the oppressive gloom. Shadows stretched and twisted, whispering secrets on the cold wind that snaked its way through the deserted streets.
Layla hurried along the sidewalk, her footsteps echoing loudly in the stillness. Each darkened doorway seemed to hold a hidden danger, and the shadows seemed to dance and writhe as if alive. A shiver ran down her spine, and she pulled her coat tighter around her, desperate to reach the safety of her apartment. As she rounded a corner, a sudden movement in the shadows across the street made her jump. Her heart pounded in her chest as she strained her eyes to see what had caused it.
Layla quickened her pace, her mind racing with unsettling possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, followed by something unseen. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to remain calm.
"It's just your imagination," she muttered to herself, trying to convince both her mind and her racing heart. She just needed to get home and lock herself inside. Reaching into her bag, she fumbled for her keys, her fingers trembling slightly. She just wanted to be inside her apartment, surrounded by familiar things, away from the watchful eyes she felt all around her.
Just as she reached her apartment building, a voice startled her.
"You shouldn't be out alone at night, child," the voice rasped.
Layla whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing behind her, shrouded in the shadows of a nearby doorway, was an old woman.
"Who are you?" Layla asked, her voice barely a whisper.
The old woman smiled, a chilling, toothless grin.
"That's not important," she said. "What is important is that you heed my warning. This city, it holds secrets, dark secrets. And there are things here that watch, that wait for their chance to strike."
Fear coiled like a serpent in Layla's gut. She could feel it tightening with every passing second, making it hard to breathe. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last.
The old woman leaned closer, her eyes boring into Layla's. There was a depth in those eyes, a history of untold stories and hidden fears.
"There are shadows here," she whispered. "Shadows that have been here long before us and will remain long after we're gone. Shadows that cling to the unwary, that feed on fear. They are drawn to it like moths to a flame, and once they latch on, they never let go. Be careful, child. Be very careful. The world is full of dangers, but none as insidious as the shadows that lurk in the corners of our minds."
Layla wanted to dismiss the old woman's words as the ramblings of a senile mind. But the conviction in her voice, the intensity in her gaze, made it impossible to ignore. But there was something in her eyes, a chilling intensity, that sent shivers down Layla's spine. It was as if the old woman had seen things, experienced horrors that Layla couldn't even begin to imagine.
"What should I do?" Layla asked, her voice barely audible. She felt a desperate need for guidance, for some way to protect herself from the unseen threats.
The old woman straightened, her smile fading. Her demeanor shifted from one of eerie calm to urgent seriousness.
"Go home, child. Lock your doors and windows. Do not let the darkness find a way in. And whatever you do, don't let the shadows in. They are relentless, and once they enter, they will consume everything."
And with that, she turned and melted into the darkness, as quickly and silently as she had appeared. It was as if she had never been there at all. Layla stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, the old woman's words echoing in her ears. She felt a chill run down her spine, and the weight of the warning settled heavily on her shoulders. Shaking her head, Layla finally fumbled with her keys and hurried inside her building. She rushed up the stairs to her apartment, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion.
Once inside, Layla double-checked all the locks on her door and windows. The silence of the apartment, usually a comfort, was now unnerving. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old building, sent a jolt of fear through her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even within the supposed safety of her own home.
Desperate for answers, Layla decided to seek out someone who might be able to shed some light on the old woman's cryptic warnings.
The next morning, Armed with a vague description of the old woman and a growing sense of unease, Layla found herself stepping into the dusty bookstore.
Behind the counter sat an elderly man with a shock of white hair and a pair of spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose.
"Can I help you, dear?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong for someone his age.
"I hope so," Layla replied. "I'm looking for information about local legends, stories about shadows."
The old man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze.
"Shadows, you say?" he mused, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity and concern. His eyes, though aged, sparkled with a sharp intellect that seemed to pierce through the dim light of the room. "And why would a young lady like yourself be interested in such things?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued.
Layla hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. The weight of the old woman's warning still hung heavily on her mind, and she could feel the fear creeping back into her thoughts. But something in the old man's demeanor, a quiet intensity that reminded her of the old woman, compelled her to confide in him. There was a sense of urgency in his eyes, a silent plea for the truth. She told him about her encounter the previous night, about the old woman's warning, and the growing sense of dread that had settled over her. Her voice trembled as she recounted the eerie details, the shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own.
When she finished, he let out a long, slow sigh. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of her words had added to a burden he already carried. "So it seems, the shadows are stirring once more," he murmured, almost to himself. His voice was low, filled with a mix of resignation and determination.
"What does it mean?" Layla asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What are these shadows?" Her heart raced as she awaited his response, the fear evident in her eyes.
"They are the darkness that lingers at the edge of our world," he said, his tone grave. "They are the remnants of forgotten fears and unspoken sorrows, always lurking, always waiting. They are drawn to fear, to despair, to the lonely and the lost. They feed on the emotions that we try to hide, growing stronger with each passing moment of doubt and fear."
And they will stop at nothing to claim what they believe is theirs. They are relentless, driven by a hunger that can never be sated. Layla's heart pounded as the old man's words sank in. The reality of the shadow's threat became all too clear, and she knew that her life would never be the same again. A cold dread washed over Layla. She could feel the icy tendrils of fear creeping up her spine, making her shiver uncontrollably. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker and more menacing with each passing second. The old man's words confirmed her worst fears. His voice was grave, each word dripping with a weight that seemed to press down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had hoped, prayed even, that he would tell her something different, something that would dispel the growing dread within her.
"But why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. She felt a lump form in her throat, making it difficult to speak. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. What do they want with me? Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She felt as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss that threatened to swallow her whole.
"They sense something in you, child," he said, his voice a low, rumbling whisper that seemed to echo in the dimly lit room. His eyes bore into hers, filled with a mixture of pity and fear. A power, a potential, that they both crave and fear. His words sent a chill down her spine. She had always felt different, but she had never understood why. Now, it seemed, the answer was within her grasp, but it was wrapped in layers of danger and uncertainty.
He reached into a drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a small leather-bound book. The book looked ancient, its cover worn and cracked, as if it had been handled by countless hands over the centuries. Its cover was dark, almost black, and it felt strangely cold to the touch. Layla hesitated for a moment before taking it, the chill of the leather sending a shiver through her fingers. He handed it to Layla. She could feel the weight of it in her hands, both physical and metaphorical. This book held secrets, answers, and perhaps even more questions.
"This book will tell you what you need to know," he said. His eyes never left hers, as if trying to convey the gravity of the situation through sheer will. "But be warned, child, some secrets are best left buried." His words hung in the air, a dire warning that sent a shiver down her spine. She knew that once she opened this book, there would be no turning back. Once you open this book, there will be no turning back. The shadows will know you are aware of them, yet, and they will come for you. His voice was almost a whisper now, as if the very walls had ears. The shadows will know you are aware of them, and they will come for you. Layla felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows more oppressive.
Layla stared down at the book in her hands, her mind reeling. This was it. The truth, or at least a path to it, lay within these pages. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination welling up inside her. But at what cost? Was she willing to risk her life, her very soul, to uncover the secrets of the shadows? The question gnawed at her, but she knew she had to find out. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost.
Taking a deep breath, Layla made her choice. She opened the book. The pages felt fragile under her fingers, as if they might crumble to dust at any moment.
As her fingers brushed against the first page, a cold wind seemed to sweep through the shop, extinguishing the lights and plunging them into darkness. The sudden chill made her gasp, and she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. And in the shadows, Layla could have sworn she heard a whisper, a voice that seemed to slither into her very soul. It was a sound that made her blood run cold, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once.
Welcome, it hissed. We've been expecting you. The words sent a jolt of fear through her, but also a strange sense of inevitability. It was as if she had been destined to open this book, to step into this world of shadows.
Layla's journey into the heart of the city's darkness had just begun. She felt a strange mix of fear and determination as she stepped out into the night, the book clutched tightly in her hands. The shadows were watching, waiting, and she was now a part of their world. She could feel their eyes on her, their whispers in the wind, and she knew that her life would never be the same again.